Hello, we're the Bad Movie Gang. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Chris, and today we're going to be reviewing Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Now you must be wondering, who the hell are we?
Well, we don't blame you, because we haven't actually done anything before. We're unfortunately missing one member today. Lewis unfortunately cannot be with us, but kind of see this as an informal introduction.
We'll be doing a much more formal one later in the week, a more formal video introduction with our first proper review.
And it will be with our third member as well.
Okay, so let's move on to the issue at hand. Is Indiana Jones a bad film?
Well, some of you must have been panting and sweating with anticipation when you heard that some guys calling themselves the Bad Movie Gang were reviewing Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Well, sorry to break this to you, but I'm afraid that Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull is not a bad movie.
No, it's actually quite good. And in fact, we're rushing to the film's defense because we're reading the bile of angry forumites on the internet. And we're going to look at the main criticisms of the films and why they're all so flawed and silly and ridiculous.
And pathetic.
Let's move on to our first point. We're going to get the big one right out of the way here. CGI and the use of it. Spielberg kind of shot himself in the foot here, I reckon, because in interviews he said he was going for a more rough and tumble kind of thing and using less CGI, which obviously meant that everyone got visions that Indiana Jones would suddenly become the Bourne series. It's definitely not special effect free, and everyone's complaining about that now.
Yeah, I mean, come on, I can understand some of the arguments for the Star Wars prequels about their overuse of CGI, but this is different. Now, someone I know said to me the other day, I hope they don't use too much CGI, I hope they don't overuse it, because the early ones weren't about the effects, they were about other things. And I said, no, I'm sorry. That's complete rubbish. The early ones were all about the effects. They were filled with effects.
And plus, a lot of the things that everyone remembers about these films are the effects. The ending of Raiders. Everyone remembers that.
Everyone remembers the end of Raiders, and it's because of the effects.
Exactly. Everyone remembers the roller coaster scene in Temple of Doom. That's effects as well. If the effects were poor, like I Am Legend's Darkseekers, I could understand this complaint, but no, it's well integrated and it fits with the story perfectly. If they were making the previous films today, this is what they would use. The time has moved on, and I don't see why they can't use the technology. I think everyone's just complaining about it is because it's Lucas, so everyone gets the prequels in their heads, and it's really, really in these days to slag off CGI, no matter where it's used.
That kind of leads on to another point about the film, doesn't it?
Realism, that's my big one. The CGI thing is just overreaction, personally, I think. It's more the realism complaint that I'm getting hung up on. It reminds me a lot of Die Hard 4.0 last year, or, if you're in America, Live Free or Die Hard. And everyone was complaining that lacked realism. And personally, that's a strange comment for the Die Hard series. Admittedly, the first one was sort of realistic, but by the time the sequel came along and everything past that, I think realism has pretty much gone out of the window. I mean, you're talking about a series here that has people bungee jumping off the top of a building using a fire hose, or fighting on a plane wing as it takes off, or having dump trucks carry gold, or falling 50 feet onto a boat and surviving. Die Hard was not a series for realism, not since the first one, and even then it was spotty at best, because he'd probably been dead about 1,000 times over. Similarly, Indiana Jones. Indy has never, ever, ever been realistic. I mean, people's hearts do not get ripped out and they survive. People do not go down waterfalls and falls and survive. I mean, things like that. It's never been realistic, and I'm astonished to think anyone would be realistic. They're either drunk, high, which is usually what IMDb posters are, or they're looking through such rose-tinted glasses that they're actually walking around blind.
Yeah, that's been that's one criticism that we heard. It's not realistic.
Landline fridge.
Wonderful. Alien spaceship.
The two key scenes in particular that apparently stretch people's credibility is the scene where Indy escapes in a lead-lined fridge from a nuclear explosion. Don't worry, this isn't a spoiler because it's quite early on anyway. And that can be defended by the sort of fact that in 1950 serials, people would probably get away with that sort of thing. And secondly, the waterfall thing, Does no one remember the waterfall scene from Temple of Doom? Does no one remember that? It's just the same thing times 3. Oh my god. People are over-scrutinising the film. I mean, everyone remembers the first 3 indie films. Ever since the internet was invented, it seems to be a home of people who nitpick and over-scrutinise things. Admittedly, this is a little bit hypocritical of us since we're nitpicking bad movies, but in the case of a good movie, if you over-scrutinise it, then everything will be bad.
Quite frankly, yes. Well, the thing is, the originals have achieved kind of a godlike status. They have achieved a status of near perfection, but actually, if you were to scrutinise them to the same extent that you scrutinise Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you'd probably find just as many flaws. The originals are not perfect, and also films like The Godfather and The Shawshank Redemption have this kind of halo painted above them of complete perfection, and they're not perfect. They're just really, really close to perfection. You just can't get that. No one goes back and scrutinises those films because they're just, they're perfect. They don't have any flaws, but that's the thing. They don't look for the flaws. People went into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull looking for things to scrutinise, looking for bad things about it. They probably... I wouldn't be surprised if people went in with a notebook and they noted down every bad thing as it went along, every bad thing that they could come across. I really wouldn't be surprised if some of them had done it, looking at some of the complaints. Some of them are so minor. I just want people to get a grip, sit back, watch the film and enjoy it for what it is. Films aren't made to be scrutinised. They're made to be enjoyed, especially a film like this.
And the reason we're scrutinising bad films is because we're trying to find why they don't work.
This is a film that has more good things about it in its favour than it does bad things.
It's well directed, it's well shot, it's well cast. It's very clear that Spielberg is trying to appeal to the fans. I mean, the opening Paramount shot, very old-fashioned, like the first 3 films. The fade into the anthill, that was a reference back to the earlier films again. The credits font being the same as Raiders and The Last Crusade. It's not realistic, it's not a Mike Leigh film. And quite frankly, if you think that, you're an idiot. Next thing, plot holes. Again, the earlier films had plot holes. Why didn't Indian Co. follow the workers out of the temple rather than go through the mines? Why does Indy know not to look at the Ark when it's opened? Things like that. Admittedly, the plot point about Indy being blacklisted is kind of glossed over at the end. But again, there aren't similar plot holes in the other films.
Yeah, it's just, again, going back to this, people aren't looking for plot holes. They aren't looking for points of the film to criticise, unlike with this one. People were going in, and they hated it from the start. When they heard that there was an Indiana Jones film, they already started planning things that they want to criticise with it.
Themes as well. It's 1957, and so obviously there's going to be a 50s theme, but a lot of people seem to have missed this, so it's not going to be 1930s exploring archaeology. Obviously it wouldn't be Indiana Jones without a little bit of tomb raiding, but yeah, you get the idea of this. So obviously there's going to be a lot of references to things in the 50s. Soviets, nuclear testing, existence of aliens thing, those are all very 1950s things. And you have to understand that in order to appreciate the film. If you criticise the film for having the sci-fi element, then you're kind of missing the point, because that was a big part of the 50s. The earlier films were very reminiscent of the time period that they were set in, and this is no exception.
Yes, indeed. Totally agree with that.
Just to close up the review here, just a few final points. Karen Allen, quite good. I've heard some comments that she's amateurish, which I think is quite harsh.
Yes, Karen Allen surprises her role from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I've heard some comments that she's totally amateurish in it, and that's quite frankly not true, because, well, you don't see that much of her. You see very little of her. But when she is on screen, she's certainly just as good as anyone else is in the film. And yes, there are people criticising Shia LaBeouf's performance as well.
Charisma free, I've heard, which is a ridiculous comment. The ending kind of looks forward to a new instalment with the Booth as the lead. I would be interested to see that. I think he could carry that off, personally.
Yeah, I think he could. If there were to be another one, it would probably be a lot better than Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Ray Winstone's character, Mac, a little bit pointless. His ultimate fate did remind me a little bit too much of Benny from The Mummy, who is very similar to him, actually, when you think about it. If I come to the film's defence, there have been so many imitators that it's probably hard for them to come up with something entirely original and not encounter something that the copies haven't done before.
Agreed. Because that's the whole thing. So many films have copied off Raiders of the Lost Ark. The list goes on and on and on. And not to mention this new upcoming film, Jack Hunter, where you've got a character who is identical to Indy.
So anyway, we're the Bad Movie Gang.
Minus one member.
And that was our review of Indiana Jones. We thought it was a very good film. I'd easily give it a 7 or 8.
I'd probably give it an 8 or a 9. It's not as good as the previous ones. However, I actually prefer it to Temple of Doom.
And I agree on that point as well. I'm Matthew.
I'm Chris.
And we'll see you next week.